The White House has confirmed that Ukraine is using U.S. cluster bombs against Russian forces in the country. National Security Spokesman John Kirby said initial feedback suggested they were being used effectively on Russian defensive positions and operations. Cluster bombs scatter multiple bomblets and are banned by more than 100 states due to their threat to civilians. The U.S. agreed to supply them to boost Ukrainian ammunition supplies. Ukraine has promised the bombs will only be used to dislodge concentrations of Russian enemy soldiers. They are using them appropriately. They're using them effectively, and they are actually having an impact on Russia's defensive formations and Russia's defensive maneuvering. I think I can leave it at that, Kirby told. The U.S. decided to send cluster bombs after Ukraine warned that it was running out of ammunition during its summer counteroffensive, which has been slower and more costly than many had hoped. President Joe Biden called the decision very difficult, while its allies, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, and Spain, opposed their use. The vast majority sent are artillery shells with a lower than 2.35% dud rate, a reference to the percentage of bomblets which do not explode immediately and can remain a threat for years. The weapons are effective when used against troops in trenches and fortified positions, as they render large areas too dangerous to move around in until cleared. Russia has used similar cluster bombs in Ukraine since it launched its full-scale invasion last year, including in civilian areas. Reacting to the U.S. decision to send the bombs, Russian President Vladimir Putin said his country had similar weapons and they would be used if they are used against us. Oleksandr Syrsky, the Ukrainian general in charge of operations in the country's east, told last week that his forces needed the weapons to inflict maximum damage on enemy infantry. We'd like to get very fast results, but in reality, it's practically impossible. The more infantry who die here, the more their relatives back in Russia will ask their government why. He added, however, that cluster bombs would not solve all our problems. He also acknowledged that their use was controversial, but added, if the Russians didn't use them, perhaps conscience would not allow us to do it too. Earlier this week, Colonel Oleksandr Bakulin, commander of Ukraine's 57th Brigade, told that cluster munitions were needed to inflict maximum damage on enemy infantry, although he acknowledged they would not solve all our problems on the battlefield. Others have been more bullish, including Brig. Gen. Oleksandr Tarnasky, who told last week that the munitions can radically change the battlefield, in the first report confirming the delivery of the munitions to the country. In addition to frontline positions in southeast Ukraine, the cluster munitions are also expected to be used near the Russian-controlled city of Bakhmut, the site of the war's longest and bloodiest battle. A Ukrainian official told that the munitions have been fired at Russian positions to break up the trenches. The official, like others, spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive military operations. Biden's move to send the munitions followed months of debate within the administration. The president's decision bypassed U.S. law prohibiting the production, use, or transfer of cluster munitions with a dud rate of more than 1%. The dud rate refers to the share of munitions that remain unexploded. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin defended the decision last week, saying the cluster munitions provide a bridging capability to keep pressure on Russian forces until Western arms production picks up and Kyiv will no longer need the hazardous weapon. Austin said Ukraine committed in writing not to use the munitions against population centers, and that efforts would be made to try to clean up areas where the weapons are deployed. They will record the places that they used them, and they will prioritize demining efforts, and will help them do that in those places where they have used these, Austin said. Most of Washington's NATO allies have signed the Convention on Cluster Munitions, a compact that bans their use and production, but the United States, Russia, and Ukraine never signed the treaty.